So Heather will be touching on the ALL-Ready project, and you've been signposted to that already by Susanna. So hopefully the technology will not fail us, and Heather will join me on stage because I haven't a clue what I would say if I needed to give Heather's talk.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me.
Okay, well, so hopefully, yes, the technology will work. And thank you very much for the invitation to present the ALL-Ready project. And thank you also to Susanna for setting the stage, and also for, of course, to the Commission for making this project possible. So today I'm going to present our CSA ALL-Ready. As Susanna mentioned, it's one of two CSAs that are to help prepare the European partnership. I'm presenting today on behalf of my two colleagues who coordinate with me, Muriel Membrini-Dudet and Chantal Gasquel, who are both at INRAE. And I also would like to mention that I coordinate the joint programming initiative, which is called FACCE-JPI on agriculture, food security, and climate change. And of course, we are linking the work in ALL-Ready with FACCE-JPI. Okay, so next slide, please. So I think you've had quite a bit of introduction already, but I think that one of the basic premises is that that we need to transform our agricultural systems. We need to change the way we feed the changing world, and that's going to require a major transformation in how we produce, manage, and consume food. And we think that Europe can lead the way in this transformation. So, I mean, we have need for sustainable and resilient agricultural systems that at the same time have to help mitigate emissions and adapt to the specific and changing environmental conditions while providing food and nutrition security. So this is quite a challenge, and it requires rethinking how we produce food, how we reduce and recycle waste and losses, and taking an agro-ecological approach that safeguards and uses biodiversity and ecosystem services. So I think that that's something that's nothing new to anyone here. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think, again, just to remind you that agroecology promotes a profound change of reasoning. It's local, adapted to the local environment and the specific context. It needs to be, it's adaptive, it requires adaptive management, so that takes into account the local conditions, the seasons, etc. And it requires, it's what we call in the making. So it's a sort of a real life collective experience that it requires iterative experimentation and networking. And of course, this is very in line with this concept of living labs, which depend on user involvement, co-creation, iterative process, in a real life environment. And so we think that this is this is a match that can help to lead to the transition that's needed. And if we go to the next slide now, just a word again on the transition. Oops, that's a little bit slow. Okay, yeah. So Susanna already outlined that this European partnership that ALL-Ready is helping to prepare aims at accelerating the farming system transition through the living labs and research infrastructures. And I've mentioned that there's this need for sustainability and resilience. And the living labs and other open innovation arrangements, which maybe I'll come back to about what that means, we think can help promote upscaling and outscaling of agroecological practices across Europe and beyond, and through the sharing of knowledge, best practices, and capacity building. And so this is really what this partnership, I mean, again, this is saying what Susanna did in a different way. And the research infrastructures can also bring scientific knowledge, but also data on particular systems and through experimental farms, networks, or I mean, in France we have the territoire d'innovation, and that requires, all of this is extremely data intensive and knowledge intensive. So ALL-Ready is one of the building blocks, as you heard, to start building this partnership. And I mentioned that we're one of 2 CSAs. We work with the other CSA, AE for EU, and also with the SCAR working group that Susanna mentioned. Okay, so now I'd like to go through, next slide, please. What ALL-Ready is. So here you have the different members of the consortium. I'm not going to name all of them. I think one key link to UNISECO is we have Gerald and the Tunin Institute as one of our partners. We also, as Susanna mentioned, have Agri-Food Canada, who has been a pioneer in these living labs, agro-ecosystem living labs. But we've also made connections to a number of other European projects, initiatives, aeronets, and so forth, because again, one of the key processes is being inclusive and involving the different stakeholders. So next slide, please. I might mention that our website is in the development stage, and you will have all this information available. Okay, so the main aim of ALL-Ready, as you've clearly understood, is to prepare the partnership, and we would like to also have a pilot network to test some of the principles that we'll develop in the project. And we have some questions about the criteria that can be used to characterize agro-ecological systems, but also transitions, and the methodologies needed to co-design and co-create new systems. Who are the actors involved, and who are the actors who needed to be in what activities. There's questions of governance, and again, the diversity, which is obviously a key word in the transitions, and how we can share the knowledge and across Europe for the upscaling and outscaling that's required. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'll come to it, but we have a sort of a vision of what this future European partnership will look like, and this is just a very, very sort of rough idea that you have a partnership that covers Europe, and we propose to develop different aspects that will be needed for this partnership, and we will start with this little pilot that's in the circle. So if you take home one message, that's the message for today. But now I'll go through each work package very briefly and explain some of the steps that we plan to take. So next slide, please. So there's a lot of slides, but some of them are just titles. So the first step, of course, is to have a vision and mission of the network, and that's work that's currently ongoing. Next slide, please. So again, I mean, one of the things that even in preparing the proposal, we've worked in a co-creative sort of almost living lab kind of way, and the same thing for this conceptual and operational framework of the network. So this conceptual work involves defining the key principles, the concepts, a lot of work on what an agroecological living lab is and what it looks like. And then again, taking into account the needs and expectation of the actors, and then to produce some kind of document, which is a vision and mission for the network. Again, feeding into a lot of other work that's being done by others. And if you can just click now, this is just an example of sort of a process that we're using. We've brought in a lot of different actors. I don't know if you can click. I think normally there's an animation. Yeah. So sort of a brainstorming session where we've defined the different criteria for what an agroecology living lab looks like. Who are the actors? What are the activities? What are the prerequisites and so forth? And I agree that these are complex ideas, but we're sort of honing in on what we think is the important criteria to be involved, which will allow us to go to the next step, which is the next slide, which is a mapping of the next slide, please, of the different actors. So what are the existing living labs, research infrastructures, and other open innovation arrangements? And by identifying those, that will also give us an idea of to understand the enabling factors, the barriers, the incentives for innovation in agroecological transition, and with attention to the innovation system and the societal drivers. So here I think we see also a clear link to what's been done in UNISECO. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. The mapping is going to be starting shortly, and the idea is to cover the existing territory across Europe. So next slide, please. So another important aspect of the work, which is cross-cutting, but we included in a work package, is stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please, and the pilot network. So throughout the entire project and throughout the entire process, we have a stakeholder engagement with a participatory co-creation approach. And that really crosses every single work package. We have particular tools and methods that our colleagues at ILVO are providing to do that work. And then the other thing that we're planning, as I mentioned, is to have a small-scale pilot network with a small number of living labs and research infrastructures that exist to be able to test out all the different principles of capacity building, of governance, of funding, and so forth that we need for the partnership. And this also will help us to prepare the community. So next slide, please. So in order to, again, to prepare the future network, we need to understand what it needs to run and how we can make it sustainable. So the next slide, please. This is, and I think very appropriately, this work package is led by Gerald, and I'm sure that he will bring in all the knowledge from UNISECO. We need to identify the added value of the network. And again, this is important for buy-in to promote the engagement of the different actors. We need to identify the factors for the sustainability of the network based on what we see as success factors and barriers from experience from past and ongoing living labs and research infrastructures. We need to look at and use the experience for making recommendations for the long-term success. We plan to develop an implementation plan, which will include questions of funding and governance. And also we hope that this work, or we plan that this work will also feed into the work on the strategic research agenda that will be needed for the partnership. And also an important factor is to derive recommendations for policies at different levels. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so again, the next aspect is capacity building, and this is led by ENOL, which is the European Network of Living Labs, which I didn't mention in the beginning, but of course is a very important partner because they have extensive and long experience in living labs. And next slide, please. So this work involves the preparation and initiation and testing in the pilot network of a capacity building program that will allow development and exchange between existing and new living labs and research infrastructures in the area of agroecology, tailored, so in a co-creation process, tailored to the needs of the key end users, and prototyped in the pilot network, which will allow us a rollout of materials, online materials, webinars, and so forth. So this will be the start of the work that will be needed for the partnership. Next slide, please. And then another important aspect is the knowledge and data management. And for this, we have the LifeWatch Eric as a work package leader. Again, very important partner who has extensive experience in managing data in virtual research environment, who will bring, next slide please, to bring their experience to the already project, but also to the future network. So they are developing a virtual research environment and other e-services. and they will be releasing an initial data management plan for the project based on FAIR principles, but also that will be, we hope, useful and applicable to the future network. There's, of course, the related innovation and IPR management that goes with this kind of work. Okay, and then last but not least, we have the next slide, which is communication and dissemination, and this is led by our partners at FEEBLE. And next slide, please. I mentioned the main partners, but of course there's a lot of people involved. So it's important for us to communicate internally, but also to share the work we're doing with the different stakeholders at different levels, to make sure that the results get to policymakers and to maximize the impact of the for the development of the network. So, I mean, again, thinking forward, we have work within the project, but always thinking of the future partnership. Okay, so next slide, please. So I'd just like to summarize. This is, again, coming back to this idea that we will sort of have a three-step process of building a foundation and then looking at different principles needed for implementation and piloting this, this partnership, which we hope will allow us to form and contribute, as with others, as I've mentioned before, to a very solid basis for this future partnership. Okay, next slide, please. So there's some main outcomes, but I think I've mentioned them all briefly as I went along. So a vision and mission and vision document, the mapping with the barriers, the drivers for the partnership, the pilot, the implementation plan, the recommendations for long-term sustainability, the capacity building, and I guess maybe most importantly, the evidence-based knowledge to support the transition to agroecology. And I think that's the end for me. Next slide, please. And yeah, I'd be happy to take questions, and we're very happy to be part of this co-creation process with our colleagues in the other CSA, in the SCAR, and in the Commission. So thanks.
Heather, thank you so much. I can see where the ALL-Ready project could begin to, or possibly already is beginning to answer some of the questions that were emerging in the chat. So what is a living lab? How do we define a living lab? How do we evaluate the impact of a living lab over time? And how does one bring in the actors and understand the capacity that is being built across all of those? I don't know whether you want to reflect on any of those any further than you already have.
Well, I mean, I think that in terms of the living lab, I mean, as Susanna mentioned, it's a concept that has been developed in other areas. But I think that in terms of agroecology living labs, there's as I said, we're doing this brainstorming to look. There's very specific aspects, and I mentioned that some of these key principles of user involvement and co-creation. Mm-hmm. And I think that, for example, in France, I mean, again, it's just one example because there's a number of them being built now. We have the territoires d'innovation, which are very nice examples. Most of them, most of the living labs in our area are fairly recent. So we're beginning to look at these questions of, for example, how to monitor, how to also how to involve research, because I think that's an important question. I mean, of course, there's research aspects, but it's something, since it's a quite new concept, some of the people involved have questions about, well, is it research or not? And so we're really working in a very, again, in a sort of almost a living lab way to co-construct with the different stakeholders what these concepts mean and to appropriate them together. And I think that's an important part of the work.
Mm-hmm. There's, I think this is a reflection that was made during Susanna's talk. Again, it's related to the living lab concept. So this is, the living lab approaches represent a huge opportunity, but they often also mean huge challenges. So in their experience shows that much can go wrong, representing a learning opportunity, but of course it can cause regret or disappointment on the parts of those involved. I don't know whether you have any reflections on that based on the experience that you've seen so far, or the kind of work that you're doing to pull together insight on what are these living labs and how might that concept relate to agroecology?
Well, I mean,
easy question, right?
In anything, I mean, much can go wrong. Indeed, it's a learning experience, and I think that that's a little bit what this partnership is really aiming at, is to share the experiences across Europe, good and bad, in order to slowly come to a point where maybe some of the mistakes can be avoided. Of course, understanding and I think this is probably the tricky part, is to pull out what's generic, because indeed each living lab is adapted to a local environment, local governance, and so I think that the real challenge, but also the advantage of this future partnership, is to share experiences, good and bad. So I'll stop there.
That's great, Heather, and I think what we will do is move on. There's some, I would encourage you to look at the stage chat. There's some, and also flag this up for everybody. There's some useful links that are being shared of things that we might all look at to see what we can learn from. Thank you again. And again, useful fodder for discussion in the afternoon.